This, what you're seeing right now on screen, it's just so filthy. It's just so disgusting. You are going to be molesting the monsters left and right because of this build. One of the biggest things about it is that you can just stun lock the hell out of everything and keep them in this continuous and endless loop of you being able to just obliterate them. So how does it work? Well, essentially, you are just causing wounds upon the enemy. With those wounds that you cause upon the enemy, you use a focus strike. After a focus strike, you are going to be using a helm breaker, a helm splitter. The helm splitter is going to make more wounds upon the enemy, and then you're going to do another focus strike, and this is going to keep the enemy pinned down in one location. I'm going to have several options for builds right here for you so that you have the best possible outcome. There's a couple of them that are going to require, let's say, to some extent, some endgame farming, like for the Artian weapons. The Artian weapons are naturally going to be the best weapons in the game, but if you don't really have any good Artian weapon, you want to get started with this build, then I am going to have for you that right there with some recommendations as well. So yeah, a little word from today's sponsor. I am a sucker for retro turn-based RPGs, so I present to you just that, Portal Fantasy. If you're itching for something like a retro RPG, there's just so much goodness in this one. The combat system has a turn-based creature collecting that determines your combat strategy by mixing and matching them in between the 6 different elements for creatures that you can have that even divide themselves even more, with up to 50 skills and 60 passive skills that you can teach to them and even change their appearances. As you explore this beautifully crafted retro RPG, you'll also encounter puzzles to solve so that you can continue your adventure, your quests, where you'll find, well, more quests. You'll be meeting interesting characters, engage with side content and such, and if that's just not already good enough, you can invite your friends to join you so that you can engage in PvP combat system with them and see who's really the best portables trainer. So first, let's talk about the armor pieces, and after the armor pieces, we are going to talk about the weapons that we're going to be using. After we have covered the weapons that we're going to be using, we're going to cover the decos, because one weapon is going to require different decos than the other weapon is going to have. So that being said, you are going to be required to reach the very end of the endgame of the high rank. So you are going to need to farm for the G. Arvel helm, as well as the G. Arvel van braces, and the Arc Vulcan mail, and the Arc Vulcan coil. These guys are separate individual pieces that are going to do several different things for you. But just say regular basics, you're building weakness exploit in here. So we have weakness exploit right here, we have 2 points of weakness exploit in here as well, and then we have 2 more points of weakness exploit right here. And then we are going to have Flair, which is going to be the quintessential part of everything about this build. Flair, what it does is that it allows for you to wound the enemy that much easier. That is why whenever you're using a helm breaker, you're making wounds on the enemy that you can then use focus strike to charge your spirit bomb meter, so that you can rinse and repeat back and forth. It also has a power breaker, which is going to contribute to our DPS. We'll talk about that in a little while. But also one more thing that I want to talk to you about, which is very good, is that both of these guys are going to actually have the Arcvel's Hunger and the Decimator. So the Hasten Recovery, the Arcvel's Hunger, that basically is giving you health as much damage as you're dealing. Like for example, you're dealing lots of damage, then you're going to be healing a little bit, but it's just going to be tickling of health back. And then you're also going to have the Decimator, which is basically every time that you burst a enemy wound with a focus strike, you are going to be healed back. So it also has a lot of sustainability because of that fact. Just have in mind that it's very difficult to some extent to somewhat manage some of the most scarier endgame bosses, but yeah, it's still going to be amazing against everything else. Finally, we are going to have the hat shark ribs in here because they have had 2 points into agitator, and they also have a level 2 socket for gem slot. That's the armor that we're using, and that's the skills that the armor has. Now let's talk about the weapons. Naturally, you are going to be building for this build to be as efficient as humanly possible. You want to make an elemental weapon and then use the elemental weapon against a monster that it's elemental not resistant against that specific element. However, the Artian weapons are never going to be that amazing when it comes to basic raw damage. And also, you have to be very good with the RNG, so your trade-off is not really that bad. This one, for example, the weapon that I have right here, this is an example of a dragon weapon. It's a regular stat that I like to carry against basically everything because there's just not too many monsters that are going to be resistant to dragon, so that's a very good element that you can use as a base. But you do want to have as much element boost in here as you can see right here to maximize whenever you're fighting something that it is not resistant as the specific element. Furthermore than that, you want to have at least one extra sharpness bar because the sharpness that this thing has is that the Artian weapons have, like, it's just crappy. You have just that one slight tiny little bit of a white bar, so that's not amazing. Ideally, you would want to have attack and more sharpness and those elemental boosts. So here I'm having the affinity boost, but since we are building towards so much affinity, that's really not that big of an issue. So yeah, that's something to have in mind. Ideally, attack, element boost, and more sharpness on your weapon. That's what you want to be striving to get. Also, one of the best weapons that you can have for the Artian building for this type of build would be paralysis, because that is going to allow you to CC the monster that much more. Remember that the whole objective in here is for you to pin down the monster. Every time that you're doing a focus strike, you're knocking down the monster, you're toppling down the monster. Sometimes when you're doing the focus strike, the monster stays put for quite a bit of a time right in that. So that's a very good time as well for your party members, for your crew members to attack the monster as well. But also, if you have, for example, critical status with a paralysis weapon, then you're going to be proccing paralysis about 4 times in a row, and at the same time you're going to be like knocking the enemy on as a base. So yeah, it's a very good idea to have a paralysis weapon with this build. However, on the other hand, if we don't actually have access to crafting an Artian weapon at that time, then the best possible option that you have, you're going to struggle with the sharpness a little bit in here, but the best possible option would be the Grave Cleaver, the Archimesh, which is the Dogashuma weapon tree. This is the weapon that has the highest value when it comes to attack. It has negative affinity, but we're still going to be able to make some changes, some tweaks for us to raise that affinity all the way to 100% and still being able to deal damage. Now, why do I like to use this one? It has Power Prolonger, which is not going to be consequential. It's really not going to be that amazing, because remember that we want to be doing Helm Breakers. So we don't really care about Power Prolonger that much. But this is very cool, because you will see in here that, for example, one of the skills that we have in here, which is the Flayer, is going to increase the non-elemental damage that you inflict or that you deal to those wounds. Notice by my own testing, this is by my own testing, is for example, every time that you pop a focus strike with either this weapon or, for example, against something that is weak, like for example you're using the Dimensius with a enemy that is not resistant to the specific element, doing one focus strike is going to range the damage in between 650 and 750. Both on these guys is going to be the same. The only main reason is that is true for when you're fighting something that is not resistant against dragon, something that is weak to dragon. On the other hand, this guy right here is always going to be effective against every single thing that you have out there, because this is pure raw physical damage. So if you combine those 750 alongside with the Hand Splitter and continuing the combo just in one single tap of the combo, and because the enemy is just toppled down in there, you can be dealing up to 2.5 to 3k damage if you're doing your inputs properly and you're actually managing to do stuff properly, which is very much the same thing as this one is going to achieve, but this achieves that whenever you're fighting something that is weak to dragon. So this one is a little bit more general, this one is a little bit more universal, and this one is just when you manage to actually build the weapon. However, there's going to be a little bit of a downside when it comes to this guy right in here because of the affinity. Let's actually talk about the downside on that remark now. So this is how the build is going to be looking like if you're using the Grave Cleaver Archimish, and it's very important to note that this build and playstyle is going to rely on lots and lots and lots of parrying. So you have to be very comfortable with parrying because since the weapon has so low affinity, we need to find a ways to raise it, and we're going to be using mighty jewels to raise that affinity because this is going to give us quite a bit of affinity. As you can see right in here, it's going to give us plus 30% affinity while active, meaning that the weapon is going to have base 30% affinity if we pair it up with the expert jewels. This ideally should be on level 5. I don't have a level 2 to slot expert jewel in here, but this should be a level 5 that is essentially going to be the 20% affinity, meaning that it's going to be 35, and then thanks to the actual weakness exploit that we have right in here, our weakness exploit is going to be on 30 and 20 extra percent when we're dealing damage on wounds, which we are more often than not going to be dealing damage to wounds. The only one downside is that this guy has power prolonger, like I mentioned, and that is a skill that is going to be going to waste because you want to be making wounds by using the Helm Splitter. Now, that being said, we are also going to have one slot for a level 1 critical boost, which is really not that bad in here. It's not as good as it used to be on previous iterations of Monster Hunter games, but you will see in here that our critical damage, which is more often not going to be active 100% of the time, is going to increase by 28%. Ideally, you would want to have it on level 5, but that is just going to give you extra 12% compared to the level 1 28%. So that's what it's so amazing about this one single level 1 jewel, the critical boost jewel, that you can get those extra 30% damage just for existing in here. So that's actually kind of nice. And then our flare is not going to be that amazing with this portion of the build because we're using so much stuff with the mighty jewels to try to make up for the affinity. We are using the chain blade charm. This is giving us 2 points of flare, and then we get one more point of flare from our gear, and then we are using one more level 3 flare jewel in here to increase that much more. And then just for utility, we're using Quick Shift, that is DPS, and then on protection you can use, like, I like to have Divine Protection, but you can have more healing in here or stuff that you would want to have. So this is the general build that you would use to fight against every single monster in the game. It's very cool, but remember that for you to have the full affinity at all times, you do have to be pairing quite a little bit more. But just have in mind as well that since you're actually doing the enemy is CC'd most of the time, you're not actually dodging that much, so you're still having that extra affinity at all times because you always have the enemy CC and you're not using that much stamina. However, we are not going to have the pot breaker on that one because we were using that for maximum might, and yeah, that's not going to allow you to dodge that much. So in that sense, you should start building at this point for trying to get Artian weapons. This specific build, in my opinion, is going to be a little bit better than the previous one that I showed you, merely and purely because of the fact that you can dodge, and fighting against the Rey Dahu or fighting against Arkveld or fighting against Go Magala and not being able to dodge that much, especially the tempered versions. That's one of the things that once you start fighting the tempered versions, they actually start to get more resistance and you're not going to be able to CC them as much as you would do with different tempered monsters. So on that sense, I think that this, the counterpart of this build, would be a little bit better because this gives you the affinity at all times, while at the same time giving you being on the same range of DPS because of the part breaker that we have in here. So you will see that it's very much the same build, but in here we have critical eye level 5, critical boost level 2. This should be a level 3, but I don't have a level 3 critical jewel, so yeah, we're stuck with that. That should be a level 3. We have weakness exploit level 5. We have the 5th level of Flayer. We have 3 divine blessing. Then we have 3 parts breaker to increase our DPS that much more. We have the quick shift, and then we have the extra agitator in there to have a little bit more DPS and more damage. And essentially what we're doing is that we are changing the maximum might for destroyer jewels to destroyer jewels, and also we are increasing our Flayer with 1 extra jewel that we weren't able to have on the previous build because of the maximum might. So what's the gist of everything? How does this build work? I'm actually going to have a little bit of a hunt right in here so that you can see the potential of this build, like always. But ideally, you want to build up your spirit bar. The first task is going to be that you build up your spirit bar, and then you use a handbreaker and follow with the second input for the RT that is going to cause wounds upon the enemy. The wounds upon the enemy are going to allow you to do a focus strike, which is going to charge your spirit meter once again, so that you can start using a handbreaker once again, and that is going to be repeated back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Remember that when you're fighting against tempered monsters, you do want to focus on one weak spot because their skin is thicker. So it's more difficult for you to start building those weak spots. And if you're fighting something else, then it's okay. You're going to be having like wounds left and right with so many places that it's just not going to be funny at all. Anyways, if you like the content, like and never super appreciated. No hasta you that you're a gorgeous, beautiful person. You're in the gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful person. Subscribe to the channel, join Discord. Have a beautiful day. Goodbye.